SB 1792, online access to materials harmful to minors. In the state of Florida, a age verification method must be included for entering adult websites in the state. That would require face recognition photography along with a driver's license submission. So if you're entering an adult website in the state of Florida in the future, you're going to have to show and upload to that website your personal information. Now, this opens a lot of questions, like for example, these websites are already known for scamming people. So imagine submitting your personal information to a website that is most likely trying to scam you to begin with. It definitely opens up some interesting possibilities for security of the individuals who go to these websites, but that's the state of Florida for you. On this particular law, I'm not going to give any personal opinions in favor or against. On our channel, we really don't get into politics or religion, and this is a law that seems to border right on the edge of both of those things. So no personal opinion on the law. I'm just informing you guys that this law is taking effect in the state of Florida. A new law effective now in the state of Florida. If you're visiting an adult website, you're going to have to submit a photo of your face and driver's license. So it seems that once again, the state of Florida is making laws that are aimed at portraying the state as, well, almost religious. You could say it's difficult to really label this one. You could say that the state of Florida is trying to implement laws that are moral, but let's talk about the reality of morality in the state of Florida. Because while on a legislative angle, they're portraying the state of Florida as this perfect, morally clean place, but in reality, the things that are happening in the state of Florida really do not reflect that. So in today's video, we're going to try to understand how safe the state of Florida really is and why, once again, analytical manipulation that portrays the state in a certain light, but in reality, the truth is far from it. This law is aimed at protecting minors, and while that sounds like a noble concept, most minors today are very internet savvy, and this law seems to be irritating adults more than minors. It almost seems that when you make something illegal, it almost makes it more attractive, or when you forbid somebody from doing something, they may actually be more inclined to do it to begin with. I remember when I was in middle school, we had these new computers in the school libraries, and you couldn't enter adult websites, and just about every kid in that school figured out how to go around the state school systems, and they did it not because they were going to do that to begin with, but because they weren't allowed to do it. It actually became a thing to do it. And I feel like with this law, I don't think the state of Florida is more internet savvy than a bunch of kids with computers and cell phones. It is true that it is concerning how kids today at a young age adapt to computers and these devices. But the sad reality is that these kids are actually much more internet savvy than the vast majority of us. And I've seen kids very young be able to do things with computers and devices that are outright, well, concerning. But the issue is that the younger generation grew up with a phone and a laptop in their hand, and they are very internet savvy. And I do not think that this law is actually going to stop kids from getting on these websites. If anything, it's going to teach kids how to find ways around it, and that's probably what's going to happen. I mean, just looking back at when I was in middle school, it would have been a very creepy thing to do that at the school library, except for we weren't allowed to do it, so it became somewhat of a flex or stunt on other kids if you could figure out how to do it. And it went from being something creepy that you wouldn't do to begin with into something that now you could flex about being able to do. And I really feel that this law is just going to teach kids, well, from a young age, how to start bypassing cybersecurity options. And that's not exactly the route you want to send kids, but the state of Florida thinks that this is a good idea. Personal experience, like I said, young kids are very internet savvy, and I don't think that the state of Florida is more internet savvy than these kids who grew up with internet in their hands since they were little. It's actually probably going to become a flex now for kids that are able to bypass these security measures to actually have this material now, because now it's some type of flex that they were able to outdo the state of Florida, and this is probably going to encourage it more than discourage it. But that's just my own personal opinion. And next year, there's a new law coming that anybody under the age of 14 cannot have social media accounts in the state of Florida. Now, that law isn't until next year. It came with the same packages of laws, but it isn't effective yet. And that law is going to be a completely different problem as well, because, again, it's going to push kids into other social media networks that are probably less familiar with the ones we have now, which makes them that much more dangerous. These laws may on the surface appear to be beneficial, but they open up new windows and actually new dangers for a lot of people. It's just been my experience that when you try to tell kids that they can't do something, that it becomes a serious flex if you actually do it. And while I don't think this is a serious day-to-day concern for the youth in Florida, and it can almost be analytically proven, but again, nothing in the state of Florida makes any sense. And again, we're talking about general application of the law here, not personal opinions. I would say that most people my generation that grew up around computers when they were young simply went and did a lot of horrendous things on the internet simply because it was an allure or because it was like something to conquer. Like, I have to get on these websites. I have to do these things because we're not supposed to do them. LimeWire was a thing when we were growing up. So if it was forbidden, if it was wrong, it attracts people to do it. So I think this law may actually have a very serious practical application issue, that it seems that all it's going to do is teach kids how to bypass security measures. Now, I'm an Uber driver in the area, and I'm already encountering how kids 14, 15 years old bypass general security protocols. They have their own bank accounts. They have their own Uber accounts as minors, which they're not supposed to. So it's not like these kids today are not able how to figure out how to do this. They're going to figure it out. In fact, you're teaching them how to bypass security measures, and that doesn't make them much safer moving forward. So it's one of those situations where people are going to do these things no matter what, and by making it more difficult, you're only teaching people how to become more criminal-minded. And you're talking about cybersecurity here. It's the pathway to kids having credit cards, creating Uber accounts. I mean, once you teach kids that they can bypass security measures and do things and have access to things they can't have, what makes you think after they know how to do that, they're also not going to start creating Uber accounts, bank accounts, and even more as minors? It's almost like it's going to encourage kids to do these things because they're not able to, or because they were going to do it anyway, so now they learned how to do it through a more illicit method, and now they can use that information to continue to do more illicit things. It doesn't seem like the practical application of this law will be very beneficial. And if the state of Florida was this morally clean place, it would make sense, but the reality in the state of Florida is very different.
Pocos son los obreros. Bueno, no te preocupes, Señor. Yo voy y predico el mensaje. Yo no soy egoísta. Yo le predico el mensaje a la población para que la población obtenga la salvación de su alma. Para que la población conozca el camino, la verdad y la vida, que solamente es Jesucristo, el Hijo de Dios. El que hizo el sacrificio, amigo mío, por usted y por mí en la cruz del Calvario. El que derramó su sangre limpia por usted.
You guys might remember that a while back, I made it my goal that I was going to prove to you guys that Manatee County's homeless population estimates were a lie. And I made it my goal to document over 170 homeless people in this county, because that was supposedly the number of homeless people we had here. So I made it my personal goal to interview every single homeless person in Manatee County to show you guys that the Florida health numbers were wrong. Well, since I got close to proving them wrong, they actually changed the number. They went overnight from 177 to over 600 homeless people in their estimates for this county. So when Florida Health realized that we had made it our goal to show the real number of homeless people in Manatee County, they went ahead and they changed their analytics because they knew that they were about to be proven wrong by some random YouTuber. So they went ahead and changed the number to something like 600, which is still a questionable number, but at least it's a more believable number. But this isn't the most questionable analytics about this county. So we're talking here about adult stuff. So let's talk about forcible assaults, right? According to Florida Health, the same website that told us that Manatee County only had 177 homeless people, until I tried to prove them wrong and they changed it to a more believable number, right? Same people, Florida Health. So according to Florida Health, Manatee County only had 43 forcible assaults in the county last year. But if you've been watching those homeless interviews, you may notice that I have probably documented more females telling me they were victims of that crime in Manatee County than the entire county. In other words, we've talked about this extensively on our YouTube channel, that if you become a homeless female in the state of Florida, particularly here in Bradenton, Manatee County, it's not a matter of if you'll become a victim on the streets, but when and how many times. In other words, just with the individuals that I have interviewed here, the females that I have interviewed in this county, I have noticed that just among that select group of people that are homeless females in the streets of this county, they have been victims more than 43 times. And that's just a select group of people that I've interviewed. And these are very delicate things that a lot of times, if you watch my videos, you'll know that I'll edit out when the women talk about that stuff. But that number is realistically much higher. But forcible assaults are like homicides. It's one of those analytics that law enforcement and county officials simply do not want to document because it makes their counties look bad. After all, who the crap is going to move to a county that's known for forcible assaults? Because of the nature of this particular crime, analytics are extraordinarily unreliable. The state of Alabama, which I've also lived in, claims to have an even lower rate than Florida, and I can guarantee you this is absolutely not accurate. When I lived in Alabama, it was nothing but horror stories from all the neighbors I talked to about how prevalent this situation was in Alabama, and many times individuals being accused were people in law enforcement, or they had some connections with powerful people and people were afraid to press charges, or if they tried to press charges, they really couldn't do it because those individuals had local connections that made them very powerful. So this is a thing in Florida that is bad. It's even worse in Alabama, but analytically, the state of Alabama is among one of the lowest states in the country for that particular type of crime. Who would believe that, right? So without a doubt, as I start to document the homeless population in Florida, one of the most shocking discoveries that I had made is how propense homeless females are to be victimized. And not only once or twice by the same person, we're talking over and over by different individuals. There are literally people who go out there and try to hurt homeless females because they believe they're vulnerable. And unfortunately, law enforcement is not very proactive at handling these situations. And I know the annual count for Manatee County is about 43. Could I make it my goal to get that many stories? I absolutely could, and I could definitely disprove this analytic, but I don't think that's necessary. I think the vast majority of us understand that law enforcement is not proactive at going after this particular type of crime. In particular, here in Bradenton, though, I can tell you that the situation with homeless females is scary. And we've even had females on our channel mention, it isn't about whether it's going to happen to you, it's when and how many times and by how many different individuals. So that's the reality. I know the analytics say one thing, but the reality is that most homeless females have had this happen to them not once or twice, but innumerable amounts of times. And it's really sad to say, but it is the most prevalent situation here in Bradenton than anywhere else. It's pretty bad in Orlando. It's pretty bad up by Titusville and Brevard County. But here in Manatee County, it is absolutely unreal. Now, normally I would throw in a clip of females telling you this for our YouTube channel, but I'm not going to do it on today's video. These are very sensitive crimes, and I'm not going to make an example out of any of these females. But if you have been watching my series of interviewing homeless people, you'll see that many of the females will tell you that they've been victimized. So we know that those analytics don't even represent the victims among the homeless population, far less the county in general. Take Manatee County with 400,000 people. There's also an analytical racial misrepresentation in that it seems that Hispanics are more proactive on pressing charges for these crimes while the white population isn't. In other words, the perpetrators are many times on the news, Hispanic males, but that only means that Hispanic families are more proactive because the victims are within a family. But this happens more often among the white population, among individuals who are less likely to report these crimes because they're not part of a family unit. They're people that are more vulnerable. And don't even get me started on the foster care system. The stories that I have heard from people that I have interviewed are absolute nightmares. Analytically, we can see that the northern part of the state over there by Alabama has the highest rates. So it doesn't even analytically make sense that Alabama being over there would be less than Florida analytically. So we can say that when it comes to the analytics of forcible assaults, what we are seeing represented analytically and documented, it paints a very misleading picture of the reality. I think the state of Florida should be more proactive in actually defending people that are being hurt versus portraying that the state is doing something, because this is one of those laws that portrays like the state of Florida is morally clean. But what I have seen here on the streets of Bradenton sadly surpasses, I think, analytically what's going on in Alabama. And I was in rural central Alabama, and I think here the problem is even more prevalent than central Alabama. So there's definitely a problem with that. And if you were to look at the crimes in Alabama, like the arrest reports here are homeless people, trespassing, DUIs. But if you look at the state of Alabama, the overwhelming majority of arrests in rural counties in Alabama, like where I lived in Elmore County, were domestic related. So it should just give you an indication that those types of rural settings actually are more propense to this problem than cities. But we already know that. Sadly, the state of Alabama has even become the pun of those types of jokes because of the reputation they have for these situations. So it's a very underrepresented, misunderstood, and the analytics don't correlate to any real factual situations. But in the state of Florida, cities like Bradenton, where I live, it really is fearful for the women that are out there vulnerable because of the amount of predators that exist. And when I do my interviews of homeless females in other counties, the propensity of them to say they've been victimized or as often is much less than here. So this is a regional problem here in the city of Bradenton. And even Sarasota is right next to Bradenton, and it really hasn't been the case. There's also been a few notorious cases, like there's been homicides in homeless camps in Manatee County and in Sarasota County and in Polk County as well. And sometimes the background details of what led to those homicides in these homeless camps are retaliations for assaults. In the case of the notorious case out of Polk County that Grady Judge spoke on, the individual that was killed at a homeless camp by a notorious person called Mexico, it was a retaliation for an assault. It was somebody who was assaulting a female, and a gang member at the homeless camp handled the situation. And a lot of times, many of these homicides that we hear among the homeless population, there's background stories to them. Many times I'm able to get the background stories from people on the ground, and it varies greatly from what we hear on the news. So many times the homeless assaults, the fights among the homeless, the homicides among the homeless population, many times are related into retaliation or protecting individuals who are being victimized from other people, but you don't really get the full story on the news. We just hear it's a retaliation or this or that, or somebody got killed at a homeless camp. But if you start to get the background details on what exactly is happening and why these homeless camp homicides happen, or why some homeless person got hurt, many times it has a lot to do with this particular situation. And it's been happening in Bradenton. It's happened in Sarasota, and it's happened in Polk County. So I'm not telling you some wild fetch story. I'm telling you real life cases, like the case of the person in Polk County over there where Grady Judd made a press conference. He specifically said that the homeless person was being victimized and the other homeless people retaliated because of that. So this isn't some far-fetched story. This isn't some crazy thing that I'm making up. You can find Grady Judd talking about the case in Polk County. We've had it happen in Sarasota and Manatee County as well. This is a very prevalent thing here in the state of Florida. Now, if you guys remember the video that I did in Polk County, I actually went to that homeless camp and they dragged me to the woods where I saw the hole where the person was buried. And that person was a victim of a homicide in retaliation for an assault. That's the way Polk County News put it out. That's the way the sheriff said it happened. And that's the collaborating story that I got from the homeless people. And I've also had it happen in Bradenton and Sarasota. But in those two particular counties, it wasn't part of one of my videos. It was just stuff I did in the background talking to people. So it's very important for you guys to understand that here in the state of Florida, for females who become indigent on the streets, it isn't a matter of if, but when and how many times. Something that the analytics don't portray accurately, but the truth is that in the state of Florida, women are very vulnerable. We're right outside of Tampa. Tampa is known as the human trafficking capital of the United States, and it is possibly true. I've been all over the United States, and perhaps Los Angeles or Las Vegas or Albuquerque. You see a few towns that have a problem, but Tampa really is one of those towns where it's very prevalent. If you've been watching my videos, we commonly see women working the streets here at night in Sarasota, Bradenton, and Tampa. It really is a normal thing. And once we interview these females and get their stories, we really realize how vulnerable these women are. It's a lot more common than we imagine. The individuals who are in these positions are much more vulnerable than we imagine. When Polk County and Tampa have raids and they go after the human trafficking networks, they just move into Sarasota and Bradenton for a few weeks. They flood our city with this situation until the heat comes off of Tampa. So we've seen now that when they do raids in Tampa and Polk County, they just come down here to Sarasota and Bradenton for a brief period of time until the heat's off them. So human trafficking is a real serious problem here in the state of Florida, and unfortunately these criminal networks seem to be many steps ahead of the law. When they put a little bit of pressure on Tampa or Polk County, then those networks just move over here for a little bit until the heat's off of them, and well, it seems like these networks are almost unstoppable, but human trafficking is a real concern in the Central Florida area. And I really don't think you guys understand how vulnerable these individuals are. Now, I have personally gone as far as reaching out to prosecutors in the state of Florida with specific cases that are going on of people that I've met on the streets who've been victimized. And I'm going to tell you, sometimes the victims disappear. And the prosecutors, a lot of times, they have to protect the witnesses, so they don't reach back to me at all. So I don't know if the victim disappeared or if the victim... the laws pertaining to these types of crimes with the victims, the prosecutors are, I wish I could get some clear answers because, I don't know. There's a lot of laws protecting privacy. And sometimes I feel like it's hard for the public to know if these people are actually being protected, being put like on a witness protection and being sent somewhere else, or if the prosecutors by some reason or another have just given up on trying these cases or giving a crap about the people that are vulnerable out there on the streets. So it's a very delicate situation, and the privacy laws are intended to help people. Many times they make certain categories of crimes so difficult to get information about, so difficult to know anything about what's going on with the victims. And I've seen many cases here in Florida where the victims disappear if they do try to go forward with charges. So is it that the government steps in with like a witness protection thing and sends these people to a better place? It's really questionable that a state that has a reputation of hurting the homeless population and depriving them of due process is doing the right thing. But it is one of those things where you just have to wonder exactly what is happening to the victims when they do press charges. Does it make them even more vulnerable? Imagine if you are a homeless person and you're trying to press charges on somebody who assaulted you. How much more vulnerable are you now? It really is a terrifying notion that many people are finding themselves in the state of Florida. And sadly, your economical situation does affect your vulnerability, with the homeless population being the most vulnerable. Take, for example, Lakewood Ranch, the suburban community where I live. There are only 6 houses east of 75 that have registered offenders. Drag that same 5-mile circle over the city of Bradenton, for example, and there's so many predators that they overlap each other on the map. It'd be impossible to count them. So how much money you have puts you in a less vulnerable position. If you live in a bad inner city neighborhood, you're literally surrounded by dangerous people. But if you have more money, you can hide yourself from these types of problems, like living next door to creepy people. But there are over 20 homeless registered offenders in the city of Bradenton. 3 of them are homeless predators. There's a difference between an offender and a predator. An offender is somebody who broke the law. A predator is somebody who is out there actively known they just have this problem. So you figure that you have 20 people on the streets of Bradenton homeless who are known to have this problem, and then you got 3 of them that are of particular special concern. How vulnerable do you think that makes the homeless population when the homeless have to gang up together for safety? Now, these individuals that have this problem, they can't just go with the general population of homeless people and hang out in the same spots. They have to be kind of off the beaten path, and they have to hide and all that. But anyways, these individuals are still out there on the streets. And if you remember that map that I showed you guys, they're just everywhere in this county. And it's very sad that people have to live in neighborhoods that are covered with predators. Many times people tell me, "Oh, you're making fun of my neighborhood, or you're talking about my city," but this is a real thing here, dude. I mean, if you look at that map and you see how many hundreds of people live in Bradenton that are registered offenders, a lot of them are leaving other states that have stricter laws. So the state of Florida, on one hand, portrays like they're doing something to protect the people of Florida, but in reality, the state of Florida is actually a predator and offender-friendly state. So, I mean, we've actually become like the toilet for other states. There's states like Oregon, Florida, and Arkansas that have become kind of like the toilet for other states to send their most undesirable people, registered offenders. The state of Arkansas being the worst. Oregon is plagued with the fact that the state of Washington protects their people the best. They have the strictest laws in Washington, and that makes it where a lot of people that are like that from Washington have to move to Oregon because Washington's very strict. But you want to talk about a state that's actually protecting their people, look at the state of Washington. Like, you wouldn't believe how many of the homeless predators that live in Florida originated in Washington. So that's a state that said, hey, we're not going to deal with these people. But the state of Florida doesn't make laws that actually protect the people. They make laws that give the perception that the state of Florida is a clean, moral place. But in reality, it really isn't. And when you look at these maps, a lot of these cities in Florida are plagued with all these predators. In fact, there's even like communities in Florida of predators. So it's a state that is predator and offender friendly, but then wants to portray itself as morally clean. It's very confusing. So don't be fooled into thinking that the state of Florida is this clean place. The reality is that it's actually pretty scary out there.